Virtua Fighter 6 is coming. That's right, after more than a decade in the wilderness, Sega are finally dusting off their most technical, most brutal, most underrated fighting franchise. And what was even better is that as a warm-up gift, they even gave us Virtua Fighter 5 Revo, a modernised version of Virtua Fighter 5 Final Showdown, rebuilt with rollback netcode and crossplay support, finally giving the game the online infrastructure it always deserved. This was supposed to be the grand revival, a second chance for the West to finally understand what they've missed. But instead, gamers spat in its face. Barely anyone talked about it, the press barely covered it, and hardly anyone touched it. The message was clear, very few cared, and most players just shrugged and went back to button mashing their way through games with cinematic supers and 15-second cutscenes between each round. Which is tragic really, considering how great the game actually is. So, in today's video, we're going to dissect exactly what made Virtua Fighter 5 so special, and how it quietly influenced an entire generation of fighters, and why its cold reception in the West is nothing short of criminal. Why has a game that was light years ahead of its time in mechanics, animation, balance and raw skill ceiling being left to rot by the public? All over again, I might add. Let's find out. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. This is why Virtua Fighter 5 deserves respect. Yeah. Virtua Fighter holds a uniquely important place in gaming history as the first 3D fighting game, pioneering real-time polygonal graphics and a physics-based combat system that laid the groundwork for countless other franchises. Unlike its flashier peers, Virtua Fighter emphasised pure skill, precision and realism, earning the respect of arcade purists and developers alike. So much so that its influence can be felt in everything from Tekken to Dead or Alive. It wasn't just a game, it was a technical showcase and a masterclass in mechanical design. And while each entry refined the formula, Virtua Fighter 5 stands out as the magnum opus of the series, an unrivaled distillation of its core philosophy executed with unmatched elegance and depth. Even better, right now you can grab the new Virtua Fighter 5 Revo for a ridiculous 32% off, bringing it down to just $16. Given how few people have actually played it, this is the perfect time to change that. And that's not all. Through my links, you can save up to 90% off on thousands of games, including Street Fighter 6 and its DLC, Mortal Kombat 1, City of the Wolves, Tekken 8 and loads more. Enjoy the rest of the video and enjoy saving a small fortune even more. While the early Virtua Fighter games are still regularly mentioned for helping to pioneer 3D gaming and laying the foundation for modern fighting games, the later entries in the series are often overlooked, and frankly, that's not fair in the slightest. When Virtua Fighter 4, for example, launched in 2001, it wasn't just another sequel, it was a complete refinement of everything the series had built up until that point, delivered with a level of sophistication that other fighting games wouldn't catch up to for years. When the game hit arcades, it was powered by Sega's Naomi 2 arcade hardware, a beast of a system that pushed graphical fidelity far beyond what players were used to. At the time, its character models boasted remarkably detailed textures, fluid animations and complex lighting effects that made every bout feel strikingly lifelike. From realistic facial expressions to the way clothing moved with each blow, it was a visual showcase that rivaled and in many cases surpassed what even home consoles could manage years later. In an era where most fighters still relied on exaggerated effects and jagged models, Virtua Fighter 4 looked grounded, crisp and impossibly clean. It didn't just look good for a fighting game, it looked good full stop. Many at the time considered it one of the most graphically impressive games ever made. Not only that, but Virtua Fighter 4 took major strides in accessibility without sacrificing its signature depth, streamlining many of the clunkier mechanics from earlier games while expanding on advanced techniques. The evasion system, first introduced in Virtua Fighter 3, was completely overhauled. The dedicated evade button was scrapped, and evasions were now classified as either successful or unsuccessful depending on timing. But where Virtua Fighter 4 truly broke new ground was in its single player mode, something that gets far too little credit today. The AI in Virtua Fighter 4 Evolution was revolutionary, designed not just to give you a challenge but to actively learn and mimic human behaviour. It was a training tool disguised as a fighting game, one that helped players understand timing, mix-ups and counters by forcing them to actually think and adapt rather than memorise patterns. It felt like sparring with a real opponent, not just a CPU on rails. This was a system well ahead of its time, the kind of thing modern games only recently started to market as cutting edge. But then came Virtua Fighter 5. Development of Virtua Fighter 5 began with an eye toward evolving the series while retaining the purity that had made it legendary in arcades. Learning from Virtua Fighter 4 Evolution and Final Tuned, AM2 brought back the best aspects of earlier games while introducing refinements like the clash system, which allowed for intentional collision between attacks and throws, a subtle mechanic that further expanded high-level mind games. The game also featured new characters like El Blaze and Eileen, who offered fresh styles while remaining grounded in Virtua Fighter's ethos of discipline and realism. Even the training mode was robust, offering frame data and situational tutorials long before other games made such tools standard. In terms of both the depth and education, Virtua Fighter 5 set a bar that few others even tried to reach. In fact, when Virtua Fighter 5 launched in arcades in 2006, and later on consoles in 2007, it wasn't just another fighting game sequel. It was a technical marvel that once again felt years ahead of its time. Built on Sega's powerful Lindbergh arcade system, the game was a dramatic visual leap forward. At a time when many fighters were still working with flat lighting and low-res textures, Virtua Fighter 5 delivered fully 3D character models with lifelike animations, dynamic lighting, and ultra-smooth performance. Characters weren't just better looking, they moved with even more fluidity and weight that made every punch, kick, and throw feel grounded and believable. The arenas too were layered with interactive elements like breakable walls and shifting terrain. Just like its predecessors, the game's commitment to realism went far beyond the graphics. Virtua Fighter 5 was engineered with an almost scientific approach to balance and mechanics. Every character had a rich, nuanced moveset with tight frame data, situational options and viable mix-ups, but without the cheap gimmicks or comeback mechanics that had started to infest the genre. When the game arrived on the PlayStation 3, it was visually stunning and mechanically pristine, but lacked one critical feature: online play. At the time, online infrastructure was still maturing, and Sega chose to hold back rather than offer a lag-filled experience that would taint the game's reputation. While this decision was controversial, it also spoke to the studio's integrity. They valued gameplay purity over marketing bullet points. Thankfully, the Xbox 360 version released later included excellent online functionality, which brought the game to a wider audience and offered a glimpse of what high-level Virtua Fighter competition could look like globally. Still, the damage was done. Without a flashy campaign or easier entry point, many players passed it by. Street Fighter 4 and the Tekken series outperformed Virtua Fighter 5 in popularity and sales, not necessarily because they were better games, but because they were more accessible, more marketable, and far more in tune with the evolving expectations of a broader audience. Street Fighter 4, for example, arrived in 2008 with a perfectly timed comeback narrative. Capcom revived a dormant franchise with bold, stylized 2.5D visuals that honored the past while appealing to a modern audience. It offered simplified imports, cinematic ultra combos, and dramatic comeback mechanics that made every match feel exciting, even if one player was clearly outclassed. For casual players and spectators, this meant you didn't need to understand frame data or spacing theory to enjoy what was happening on screen. On top of that, Capcom's aggressive tournament support and excellent online play made Street Fighter 4 the face of the fighting game renaissance. It wasn't just a game, it was a movement. The Tekken series, meanwhile, benefited from consistent console support, recognizable characters, and a strong identity built on spectacle and, again, accessibility. Where Virtua Fighter prided itself on being pure and technical, Tekken embraced over-the-top character designs, explosive juggles, and crowd-pleasing storytelling. It also maintained a presence on PlayStation consoles from the PS1 era onward, giving it a massive head start in brand familiarity. By the time Tekken 6 launched, the franchise had built a loyal global fan base, bolstered by flashy trailers, lore-heavy marketing, and an easier-to-learn curve compared to Virtua Fighter's strict timing windows and punishment-heavy gameplay. Ultimately, Virtua Fighter 5 stood alone, a masterpiece of mechanics and balance, but one that demanded far more than most players were willing to give. It didn't offer cinematic supers, outrageous costumes, or an expansive story mode. It was a chessboard and a world asking for fireworks, and while the purists still regard it as one of the greatest fighting games ever made, its lack of accessibility, marketing push, and spectacle meant it simply couldn't compete with the flashier, more forgiving titans of the genre. In hindsight, Virtua Fighter 5 wasn't just ahead of its time, it was too far ahead. Its grounded, technical focus didn't fit the market trends of cinematic supers, auto combos, or simplified controls. It was a fighter that didn't hold your hand, and in doing so it exposed just how shallow many of its contemporaries really were. Even now, years later, Virtua Fighter 5 remains a high watermark for the genre. It didn't just refine the formula, it perfected it. But let's be honest, the lack of online support at launch certainly hurt Virtua Fighter 5, especially as online play was quickly becoming the standard for fighting games in the mid-2000s. While other titles were embracing global matchmaking and online communities, Virtua Fighter 5's initial PS3 release offered no such feature, a baffling omission for a game so deeply rooted in competitive play. With Sega's cautious approach, they were unwilling to compromise the game's mechanical integrity with a subpar online experience, which was a genuine concern during the era of inconsistent netcode and widespread lag. Ironically, that same purist mindset that made Virtua Fighter so respected is also what kept it from evolving with the times. Due to all of this, Virtua Fighter 5 exists in a strange paradox. It was both far ahead of its time and frustratingly behind it. Mechanically, it offered one of the most advanced, precise and beautifully balanced fighting systems ever created, complete with lifelike animations, intricate movements, and a depth that modern games still struggle to replicate, and yet it lacked so many of the basic features players were coming to expect. In trying to future-proof its mechanics, Sega forgot to future-proof the experience around them, leaving Virtua Fighter 5 as both a visionary work of design and a relic out of sync with even its own era. But of course, this was back then, and this is now. The fighting game landscape has changed dramatically in the years since Virtua Fighter 5 first launched. What was once a niche genre dominated by arcade culture and competitive purists has since transformed into a global spectacle fueled by esports, content creation, and accessibility-first design. Modern fighters are no longer just about depth, they're about onboarding. We now have cinematic story modes, rollback netcode, combo trials, ranked matchmaking, and training tools with frame data all built in. Developers understand that in order to thrive, a fighting game has to look good, feel responsive online, and welcome new players without compromising the experience for veterans. Games like Guilty Gear Strive, Street Fighter 6, and even Mortal Kombat 1 to a degree have successfully bridged this gap, offering mechanical nuance wrapped in player-friendly packages. In this new world, a game like Virtua Fighter 5, once seen as too demanding and bare bones, finally feels like it belongs, which I guess is why the Virtua Fighter brand has been revived. Virtua Fighter 5 Final Showdown Revo, often abbreviated by fans as Virtua Fighter 5 Revo, was released on Steam in January 2025. This version wasn't just a reissue for nostalgia's sake, or a cheap way to tease Virtua Fighter 6. It was Sega finally doing right by a masterpiece that never got the recognition it deserved. Revo brought back the Final Showdown build, already regarded as the most balanced and mechanically refined version of Virtua Fighter 5, to modern PC audiences, fully updated for contemporary systems with enhanced resolution, faster load times, and seamless integration with online matchmaking services like Steam's native friend and invite system. For many players outside of Japan, it was the first time they had proper access to the definitive version of the game, and amongst those who have played the game, the reception was overwhelmingly positive. What makes Virtua Fighter 5 Revo distinct from the original 2007's Virtua Fighter 5 is the sheer depth of refinement under the hood. Revo includes all of the balance changes and mechanical improvements from the Final Showdown arcade update, which had previously been console exclusive to 360 and PS3. These include frame-perfect tweaks to every character, an overhauled throw system that improved both execution and counterplay, expanded sidestep mechanics, and dozens of new animations and attacks that made each fighter feel more complete and expressive. Crucially, Revo also addressed one of Virtua Fighter 5's most notorious failings, online support. Thanks to modern PC connectivity and improved netcode, players around the world could finally engage in fast responsive matches without relying on fan-run events or emulation hacks. Combine that with full training mode features, save state tools, and native controller support, including arcade stick and fight pads, and Revo became not just a re-release but a proper revival. With Virtua Fighter 6 finally confirmed to be in development, Revo served as the perfect way to get lapsed players back in the saddle and introduce a new generation to a fighting game built entirely around precision, balance and footsies. So while Virtua Fighter 5 Revo seems to have been released to act as a hype builder for the long-awaited 6th entry, it was far more than just that. It was a long overdue course correction, a celebration of a series that had been unjustly neglected in the West, and most importantly proof that great design doesn't age, it only gets more impressive with time. And yet, despite Sega finally doing the right thing, releasing Virtua Fighter 5 Final Showdown Revo on Steam in January 25, with all the bells and whistles modern players expect, the response was muted at best. For years, fans had pleaded for a definitive PC version, something that could give the game a second wind and reintroduce it to a broader audience. But when it finally arrived, it was met not with fanfare, but with indifference. Steam player figures painted a bleak picture. Low concurrency, limited engagement, and very little sustained interest. Despite the long overdue Steam release of Virtua Fighter 5 Revo and the confirmed development of Virtua Fighter 6, the Western gaming audience still seems largely indifferent to the series. While die-hard fans and competitive purists continue to sing its praises, there's no getting around the fact that Virtua Fighter simply doesn't generate the buzz that surrounds Tekken, Street Fighter, or even Mortal Kombat. It remains a baffling footnote, admired in hindsight, discussed in fragments, but never embraced with the same enthusiasm. And with each passing generation of fighting games, that gap in visibility only seems to grow wider. While competitors have continued to lean into cinematic storytelling, flashy supers, and exaggerated character designs, Virtua Fighters remain grounded, technical, and relatively understated. It rewards discipline, not chaos. Its characters don't shoot fireballs, morph into demons, or shout melodramatic one-liners. Instead, they perform tight, realistic martial arts sequences with clinical precision. That might win respect from seasoned players, but it does little to catch the eye of casual viewers scrolling through trailers or Twitch streams looking for a dopamine hit. Marketing, or the lack thereof, is another issue. Sega has never promoted Virtua Fighter in the West with the same energy or consistency as its rivals. Even with Virtua Fighter 5 Revo dropping on Steam, it came with almost no fanfare outside of a few niche corners of the internet. There were no bold social media campaigns and no cross-promotional stunts. Meanwhile, Capcom floods the timeline with Street Fighter 6 content. Bandai Namco hosts Tekken World Tour events, and NetherRealm drops cinematic trailers that dominate YouTube for days. Virtua Fighter simply doesn't play that game, and in the attention economy, that's a losing strategy. There's also the lingering perception problem. Many gamers in the West don't really know what Virtua Fighter is. Unlike Mortal Kombat, which became a household name through controversy and bloodshed, or Street Fighter, which dominated arcades and had a Saturday morning cartoon, Virtua Fighter never broke into the mainstream pop culture sphere. It was the technically superior fighter that never got the memes, the movie deals, or the marketing push. It wasn't edgy or bombastic, it was brilliant but quiet. And in a culture that values the loudest voice in the room, Virtua Fighter has always struggled to be heard. And so, even now with one of the greatest fighting games ever made available on the most accessible platform, and a new entry on the horizon, the West continues to overlook Virtua Fighter. It's not because the game isn't good, it's not because it hasn't earned its place, it's because the conversation moved on without it. And Virtua Fighter, for all its mastery, never learned how to shout loud enough to join back in. If you've made it this far and you're even remotely curious about why Virtua Fighter 5 deserves better, now's the perfect time to find out. Right now you can grab Virtua Fighter 5 Final Showdown Revo for a ridiculous 32% off, bringing it down to just $16, and given how few people have actually played this masterpiece, there's never been a better moment to change that. And that's not all. Through my links you can save up to 90% on thousands of other games, including Street Fighter 6 and its DLC, Mortal Kombat 1, City of the Wolves, Tekken 8 and loads more. Support the channel, pick up some great titles for next to nothing, and maybe, just maybe, help bring Virtua Fighter the recognition it always deserved. Yeah. Cheerio.